does he get the idea that things won't stop without something that causes friction? Galileo, right? Galileo gives us the idea that unless there's something that causes drag or friction, something will just keep on moving, right? Well, sound, he doesn't see any way that that will stop. So once that goes in, once the particles enter into the eye, and when you're touching things, he's actually looking at the way the body works, and he thinks that these hollow tubes are full of air, and when you touch something, it creates air pressure on those tubes that then end up going into your brain. So virtually everything he tries to explain, how do all these senses work, are physical machine-like processes that end up creating disturbances in the brain, which don't stop even while you're sleeping. Hence, we have dreams. Let's get back up here. Is this fun? Do you guys find this interesting? Miracles and their use, the Word of God and the prophets, scriptures, equal taxes. Uh-oh, don't break. Shoot. Everything is physical movements entering into the body through our senses, into the brain, moving around, causing us to think. What kind of will do we have in that sense? Well, remember the issue we have about, do we have a free will? According to Hobbes, everything is determinist, cause and effect. So all these things enter into the brain, moving around, cause a reaction, cause an appetite, cause all these different things. So it's totally dependent on the cause. So where do we get a free will? Well, if you're tied up in a chair and you want to get up from the chair, you can't because you're tied to the chair. But if you aren't tied to the chair and you want to get up, you can. So for Hobbes, even though everything is determinist, free will is a freedom that you have to follow the cause and effect relationships that you associate with your desires, as opposed to the restrictions that might be imposed on you by those things that frustrate your desires. So it's a determinist system, right? Everything is determined by cause and effect. But as a machine, you want to do things, and if you're not able to because of things that prevent you, then you don't have free will in that case. You're restricted. But if there's nothing preventing you from doing what you are caused to want to do, then you have free will. So that's kind of an interesting explanation for that, right? By the way, have you ever been in a jury pool? Briefly. Yeah, briefly. Interesting. Yeah, I had the pleasure occasionally. I remember once I went so far as to actually be in the jury and then be interviewed by the various counselors, and it was so fun that they asked all the questions and I had all good answers and everything. And at the end, the prosecutor said, "And Professor Jamison, do you remember that you taught me logic 10 years ago?" I was like, oh. That was embarrassing and fun at the same time. It was one of those weird things. I didn't remember her, but she remembered me, that was fun. But the interesting thing here, and what I like bringing this up in this case, is if you are convinced that, say, a criminal, or, well, an individual is not found guilty yet, but he's an individual that has been charged with a crime, say, shooting somebody in a car. And in fact, the individual was in Mountain View. He had been walking on the street with his friend the day before, and this car drove by, and the passenger pulled out a gun and shot his friend. And then they said to him, "Tomorrow we're going to come back and get you." The young man made sure he had a gun. The next day he saw that car coming, and he went over to the passenger side and he shot the guy in the passenger seat, who was the one who had shot his friend the day before. So there's a court. Question is this young man guilty of murder? Because he wasn't defending himself at the moment. He went up deliberately and shot the individual in the car. So you've got a jury, and they're trying to decide, is this young man guilty? Or would any of us in the exact same situation have done exactly the same thing? In other words, we should not find him guilty, right? So the trial is all based on the lawyers trying to determine the nature of the jury. So that they get someone, that's going to be on their side in this decision-making process, right? So individuals that are primarily religious and believe that St. Augustine taught, you're guilty. You have free will. You didn't have to do that, and it's clearly illegal for you to go up and shoot somebody. So therefore, this person is guilty. On the other hand, if you're a follower of Hobbes, and you think, well, wait a minute, any of us in that situation would have done the same thing, because we're machines, and everything that led this machine to do what he did would have led us to do, if we were that machine, to do what he did. So he is not guilty. From that point of view, it's instead the society's fault for putting that young man in this kind of a situation. So there's a big, by the way, the same argument as in the paper today. I know no one else in the room except me reads the paper. Is it true? But the article in the paper this morning was about homelessness and how these individuals are not guilty of individually deciding to be homeless. It's the bigger system that's creating this problem that we have to work with, right? So that's the Hobbesian point of view as opposed to the St. Augustinian point of view, right? So who's going to agree with that person? Who's going to disagree with that person? It seems like depending on which cultural perspective you've primarily glommed onto somehow is going to lead you in your position on that. Is that fun? Should I keep presenting that little bit as an introduction to Hobbes? But what I want to try to do is suggest the physicality of Hobbes' explanation for things. Yes, it comes from Galileo, but yes, it's Aristotelian in a way, because our knowledge is physical based. It's not like we've got a soul, an independent soul. For Hobbes, it's just the physical mind. And everything you know comes from your experience, right? Physical experience is where everything comes from. There's nothing else. When we get to John Locke, we have an interesting dilemma there, because famously John Locke argues when we're born, our mind is a tabula rasa, which means a blank slate, right? You've probably heard that expression, right? And on that experience we'll write, right? So this is Hobbes, and John Locke is pretty much a follower of Thomas Hobbes. So we'll see that, and we'll have fun with that. But for Hobbes, it's all experience, right? There is no mind that's separate from the body. So in his relationship with René Descartes, notice that René Descartes is considered a mind-body dualist. The mind is separate from the body. In fact, he can't even prove that he has a body, because all of his thinking is mental as far as he's concerned, right? It's all in the mind. And so he can't prove that the physical things exist. You have dreams. How do you know when you're dreaming versus when you're in physical reality? You know, how do you know the difference?
Look at your watch. Look at your watch.
Look at your watch. Flip the light switch. Whoa. What if that's still part of the dream?
Bring a little top in it if you spinning forever.
That's fun. No, there's all kinds of dilemmas there. You know, probably have experienced dreams that you thought were so realistic you thought they were really happening. But you know, when you flip that and you say, well, how do you know you're not dreaming right this minute? You know, what do we say? Even in a contemporary point of view, individuals will say, well, the main thing is that you know it's reality because you can't will things away. You know, it's resistant to your desires. That's how we know reality is different than our dreams. But so Descartes, European rationalists, they're all thinking knowledge comes primarily from our minds figuring things out, like mathematics. Hobbes, on the other hand, is a British empiricist, although officially British empiricism doesn't start till John Locke, but it's always puzzled me, why did they do that? Because actually Thomas Hobbes is doing exactly the same thing that John Locke will do. It's just, when we get to John Locke introduces the British empiricist problem. And that is, how do we know that the things we're sensing, smelling, tasting, seeing, hearing, is the way things are in themselves? So we get this interesting puzzle, the things in themselves versus the way they appear to us. And we're trapped, because you can't get out of your own mind to take a fair look at the way things are and see if your mind is perceiving them as they are. In fact, what eventually becomes the main issue is, are there even things out there outside of the mind? Maybe it's all just in the mind. So, the Matrix kind of thing, right? Okay. That's not exactly your mind, but nonetheless, it's still just a computer-generated game, etc. By the way, I should have mentioned The Matrix, the movie, with regard to Descartes, because that's kind of like Descartes' dilemma, you know, red pill, blue pill kind of thing. Okay, so Thomas Hobbes, everything is physical, and what's the main thing that triggers our body's choices? Pleasure or pain? So if something's going to hurt, we learn not to want to do that. If something's going to be pleasurable, we learn to want to do that. And so we're transformed by our experience to prefer pleasure versus, against pain. So where does this go? And this is absolutely essential, and that is the social contract. Thomas Hobbes is the first social contract philosopher. I mean, I guess it depends on who you're looking at, but when you get right down to it, how much time do I have? Not that much. Well, let's go to this. This is religion. Where does religion come from in all of this? Well, I love this, seeing there are no signs nor fruit of religion, but in man only, there is no cause to doubt that the seed of religion is also only in man, and consistent in some peculiar quality, or at least in some eminent degree thereof, not to be found in other living creatures. And first, it is peculiar to the nature of man to be inquisitive into the causes of the events they see, some more, some less, but all men so much as to be curious in the search of the causes of their own good and evil fortune. Secondly, upon the sight of anything that hath a beginning, to think also it has a cause, which determined the same to begin when it did, rather than sooner or later. And so we look at the sequence of things, the natural cause of religion, the anxiety of the time to come. The two first make anxiety for being assured that there be causes of all things that have hitherto arrived, or shall arrive hereafter. It is impossible for a man